kind of specifically about the Hampton Roads area. So I know we got some people watching from different areas around the country, and that's great because still some of these plants are still going to work in your area. So I've got all the zone information. So if you have any questions about zones, and then of course deer resistant is always a very, very popular question. So I've got all that information. The good news is I have pretty much almost all of the plants in here that are some of my tried and true perennials. Pretty much all of them are deer resistant. So I've got a couple that aren't, but definitely we've got a lot of choices for you. If you've got deer and rabbit issues, then some of these are going to be some of the best. And they're tried and true because deer and animals don't mess with them. Typically, they have very, very few issues as far as insect or diseases go. So kind of low maintenance, but really ones that are going to perform extremely, extremely well. And if there's any maintenance issues or anything that I want to explain to you, I'll definitely do that as we go through. So we're going to get rolling here pretty quick because I got a lot of plants to show you. So I'm just going to hold up each plant and show you and tell you about them. The first one I want to talk about is daylilies. Daylilies are a great perennial. I love the grassy foliage. They're just really, really pretty in the landscape, and they offer lots of different colors. So let's show you a couple here. So you can see a couple in the background here, and I'll pull those out in a second. This is Stella de Aura, and Stella de Aura is one of my favorite daylilies. It's a really, really easy daylily to grow, and it's one of the original kind of repeat blooming daylilies. So daylilies love full sun, so I'm going to go through all of my first group is all full sun plants. And what does full sun mean? Full sun means anywhere from 5 to 6 hours of good direct sun. So these plants love sun, and they can take it all day too. They can take a little bit of shade, but you're going to want to get them as much sun as you possibly can. But this is Stella de Aura. This one gets about so daylilies range in size, first of all. This one specifically gets about 12 to 18 inches high with the bloom spikes even. And it's a really pretty gold color. I know you're kind of seeing a little bit of reflection there. Let me see if I can get it right. So it looks bright yellow on the screen to me, but it really, in person, it's more of a gold color. But it's one of the best repeat bloomers. And what does a repeat bloomer mean? So some of the old-fashioned daylilies didn't tend to bloom as much. You'd get a lot of bloom spikes. If you weren't good about deadheading, then you wouldn't get as many repeats. But these tend to not form a seed and tend to continue to bloom. I don't see any seed heads here, but here's a bloom that's old and going away. As you can see, that it's closed back up. So these will just fall off. You can pick them off, but you don't have to. The tricky part about daylilies is the seed looks very similar to the bud of the bloom. So a lot of times people leave them on there, and when a daylily goes to form a seed, like any plant, they bloom to form a seed to reproduce. If you leave that seed on there, it's going to put all its energy into reproducing. It's not going to worry about blooming as much. So deadheading it is important. However, with Stella de Aura and Happy Returns and a lot of these new repeat bloomers, you don't have to, because the seed is sterile. Eventually the plant realizes that the seed is not going to form and not going to reproduce, so they drop it and they continue to bloom. So these repeat bloomers, very similar to like a knockout rose. Knockout roses or endless summer hydrangeas, they're all blooming repeatedly because they realize they can't produce a seed and they're not reproducing, and so they just keep on blooming. And so that's what's so great about the Stella de Aura. So the other one is Happy Returns. Happy Returns gets a little bit bigger. So Happy Returns gets about 18 inches, maybe 24 inches tall, but I don't know if you can quite see the difference there, but a much brighter yellow bloom. So if you don't love the gold bloom as much, then you've got this really bright yellow bloom, and this is called Happy Returns. So Stella de Aura is the gold one, and then Happy Returns gets slightly bigger, not much bigger, and is a yellow. And they are great and easy to grow, a really, really reliable perennial in the Hampton Roads area. Daylilies typically grow anywhere from zones 3 to 9 and are pretty deer resistant. I want to show you this other one here because, as I mentioned, there's a lot of varieties of these. Now this one gets obviously a little bit bigger, so we're talking into the 24, maybe even 36 inch range. There's a lot of different ones. This one I grabbed because it's Orange You Lucky. So this is Orange You Lucky Returns. And so whenever you see something that says returns on it, that means it's going to continually bloom. Watch out with some of these newer varieties because the bigger the bloom, typically the more seed that they're going to try and produce. So you do want to be a little bit more vigilant about trying to get those dead heads off. Once a flower spike ends, so you can see here, this one's got a lot of buds on it. So it's got, maybe 15, 20 buds on this one stem here. But once that's completely done, you do want to go back down into the plant and take that off down towards the base as best you can. But daylilies are great. They really have rarely any issues. Sometimes you might get a little rust on the leaves. That's kind of somewhat natural. The great thing about perennials, when we start talking about disease issues, is perennials and even some shrubs, let me get that back up there, tend to are going to go dormant at some point. For the most part, all perennials do. When we get to the winter time frame, once we get a frost, they're going to go dormant. And so what you want to do is clean that area up. And so it gives you a great opportunity to get some of that diseased foliage out of there. Now with daylilies, if you end up getting rust, we can treat that. That's very easy. Using something like a copper soap or even a neem oil will help with that. But you can get that out also just by cleaning the foliage out of the area, and then at the end of the season, definitely getting up a lot of those leaves. I talk about that a lot when we talk about Indian hawthorn. You know, Indian hawthorn get that black spot fungus. It's a very common thing in this area when we get a humid summer, which is pretty much every summer. So those leaves are going to get that black spot, and then in the winter it drops those leaves because it's saying, I can't hold on to these. I need to put out new ones that aren't diseased. And so you can almost cure the plant by raking out some of that dead old foliage that has dropped off because it's the harbinger of the disease. Same thing with a lot of perennials. Perennials, it's very, very important to go and clean it up afterwards. So let's see. Kathy says, my backyard is full to mid-day sun. Just need some suggestions for low perennials. Lots of clay as well. Kathy, I've got some options for you. So right now we're talking about sun plants, which is what I would say you have there, Kathy, is full sun. Daylilies are a great small plant. They range in size anywhere from 1 feet high and wide to about 3 feet high. Typically the clump gets bigger and bigger each year, and that's what's cool about perennials in general, is they start small and each year that clump kind of grows and gets bigger and bigger, and then eventually you can go and divide them. Some perennials you can, and daylilies would be one of those. So daylilies are a great option. The next one might work for you, Kathy, is Verbena. Verbena is a very, very popular annual, but there's also perennial varieties. Homestead Verbena is like the number one, the tried and true. Homestead Verbena has been out for a while, been the perennial of the year. It's a really, really great perennial, and it is a great ground cover. These get about 1 foot tall, so just about as tall as this right now, and can spread up to 3 to 5 feet. So you can really get some spread out of this. So it's a great ground cover. Blooms really from spring all the way to frost. So you really don't have a certain time frame. So I forgot to mention that, like with daylilies. They're going to bloom in the summer, and then they're going to tend to kind of fade out when we get into the fall, and in the spring they're just putting out their foliage, which I think is really pretty and a lot of fun in the spring to see those little grassy blades popping out. But with a homestead verbena, it's going to bloom from spring all the way till fall. They do not love really poor soil. So I know, Kathy, you mentioned clay soil. So what I would do is amend your soil with some compost. That'll really help with anything that you plant, for sure. When you got a lot of clay, you want to amend with compost. Compost is going to add nutrients and help break up your clay soil. Perlite would be a really good addition as well. So I'd get a big bag of perlite and get a couple bags of compost, and whenever you go to plant anything, Kathy, I would use that as your amendment. You want 1/3 of your soil, 1/3 of clay, 1/3 of perlite, and 1/3 of compost. And mix that up, and that's going to be what you're going to want to use as a backfill. Definitely keep your verbenas mulched. I find that helps really well to kind of keep the soil somewhat moist in that area when we go through hot, dry periods, which we're experiencing right now. So definitely make sure to keep your soil somewhat moist through those hot, dry times. But once this plant is established, it's great. It's deer resistant, and verbena grows in zones 6 to 10. So really great option for a low ground cover type of perennial. Looks great in containers. So if you're looking for a perennial in a container to come back every year, this is a great option. And they're starting to come out with new varieties and new colors. And so I grabbed this one. This is our Homestead Red. So you can see that really pretty red color. And so this is the Homestead series, but it's a red bloom. And this one is hardy as well, and will come back year after year. So it's another great ground cover option for a perennial. Loves full sun, does really well, deer resistant too. As I mentioned, a lot of these are going to be deer resistant. So we're going to kind of play with heights here and play with different colors. The other plant that we're just starting to get in, because it's been kind of a cool spring here this year, and a lot of, as we warm up and we start to get a little bit warmer, some of these summer blooming perennials are starting to come in. And this is a really great one. This is called a hibiscus. So this one's called Luna Red Hardy Hibiscus. So I'm sorry I don't have the blooms to show you, but these blooms get massively big. They're huge. They're almost the size of a dinner plate. So, if you've ever seen those dinner plate dahlias or those big hibiscus, that's what this is, perennial hibiscus. So there's hibiscus in every kind of category. There's a shrub hibiscus called Rose of Sharon or Althea. There's your perennial hibiscus, and then there's the tropical hibiscus, which I'm sure a lot of us are very familiar with. Tropical hibiscus obviously is in a different zone category. It's not going to grow in this area year-round. Perennial hibiscus grows in zones 4 to 9, so it can grow actually pretty far up north to even further down south, but it's going to die back down to the ground, so it's going to go dormant. So I don't know if I can quite show you. Can't show you on this one. There's no stump to it. But a lot of times you're going to take this right down to about 2 to 3 inches, 4 inches from the ground in the dormant season. So after all the foliage kind of decays and falls off, once we get a frost, the stems are going to turn to kind of like a straw. It's going to get hollow on the inside, and then you just cut it off right down to the base. So it's a great option for a really big plant because these can get anywhere from 3 to 5 feet high and wide. They're deer resistant. They don't have a lot of issues. So sometimes the deer might nibble on the blooms, but typically they don't really mess with them. But it's a very, very good option. Now, it's a really reliable perennial, and a lot of things will attack this thing. And so that's why I'll say it's a tried and true perennial because it's very easy to grow. However, there are things that love to eat this little leaf. And so those are things like aphids love to get on the blooms. Slugs and caterpillars will eat the leaves. Japanese beetles can also be a problem. All of those things can be taken care of. So we've got different sprays that you can put on here to prevent that and cure that if you ever have an issue. But I usually tell people if you've never grown one, you should grow one because it's easy. It's instant gratification because in the first year, this thing's going to get probably 2 to 3 feet high. And then the year after that, every year after that, it's going to get 4 to 5 feet high. Be a big kind of space taker, which a lot of times in landscape, that's a good thing to have, is something that's going to take up a fair amount of space. And then they get these big, huge blooms, and there's lots of different colors. We're just starting to get some of these rolling in. Right now I know we've got the Luna Red, which is this one. I think we had a white or a pink with a kind of a dark red center. So we've got a lot of different varieties that come in a wide range of colors. Sometimes you'll even see some of the foliage is going to be like a burgundy color. But this is a great perennial, full sun, takes up some space, which is great. So think of like a hydrangea, that kind of that size, 4 to 5 feet high and wide, and just massive, massive blooms all summer long. Now hibiscus, along with, I'll get to this one here in a second, ruela, the blooms typically last a day. So don't get worried when it blooms and then it kind of falls off. Hibiscus blooms so profusely, but the bloom typically is only going to last about a day. Sometimes you might get a day and a half, maybe 2 days, but typically your blooms are going to be 1 day. It's going to open up, put on a huge show, and then it's going to fall off the next day. So they can be a little messy. If you've ever grown a tropical hibiscus on your deck or porch or patio in a container, as we grow a lot of our hibiscus in that kind of arena, then you know that they can kind of drop a lot of stuff. But that's okay. It'll fall down, it'll decay, it'll turn into its own natural mulch, it'll provide nutrients back to its root system, or you can go through and clean them up. But really, other than that, it's a great perennial, and it puts on a show in the summer. It's amazing. So let's see, I think I saw a question pop up. What's the name of that one again? This one's called Luna Red, but it's a perennial hibiscus. This one's called Luna Red, or hardy hibiscus is what some people call them. And they grow in a wide range of zones, 4 to 9 I think is what I said. Let me see, I took a note. Yeah, 4 to 9, and they can get anywhere. There are some varieties that stay slightly smaller, but most of them are going to get right around that 4 to 5 foot high and wide. Great plant, deer resistant. Does have some insect issues here and there, but they're pretty easy to cure if you do run into those. And I always tell people, plant one, see how it does, and if we end up running into issues the first year or second year, we can cure that and we can take care of it in the future. All right, so the next one is a really, really durable plant. So some of you might not love this plant, but because it's been around a long time, it's a little old-fashioned, but any old-fashioned plant that's been around a long time is around for a long time for a reason, because they're indestructible, and that's irises. And irises are great. I love that kind of striking modern foliage. Yeah, and I didn't clean this one up because I wanted to show you. They're pretty easy to clean up, and sometimes you're going to get this kind of this foliage where it's starting to kind of get old, but it's really easy to kind of pull it out. So just go in and kind of cleaning up your irises every once in a while. Now this is a bearded iris. There's a lot of different types of irises out there, but they are almost indestructible. I love them in a little bit of sun, but they can take a little bit of shade too. So this is kind of an in-between type of plant. If you've got a dry condition, once they're established, they do very well. If it's a wetter area, they typically do okay. Irises really can take almost anything that you see come at them. They get that tall flower spike. A lot of them will bloom in the spring and fall, so you can get 2 different bloom seasons out of them. But irises are great. Not a huge quantity, but I did grab them. I grabbed this one just because if you've got a really, really tough area, or you think you got a black thumb and you really want to try something that's very easy to grow, this is a great option. And I'll tell you a story because I had irises in my first home that we purchased, 15 years ago, but there were irises already there, and I must have moved them about 10 or 15 times. I could just never find the right spots, but a lot of times I moved them and I would put them off to the side and I wouldn't plant them for maybe a couple of weeks to a month, and I'd forget about them. I'd go back, plant them, and they would thrive. So really, really great plant. I had them in a very, very shady, dry section for a while, underneath a big tree. Did really well. I've got a neighbor in my neighborhood. When I'm out on a walk with my dog, I'll always stop by, and there's a really pretty section of them underneath pine trees. It's a very, very densely shaded area, but it's a dry area too, and it's in a kind of almost a drainage ditch. So when we get a lot of rain, it gets a lot of rain, it gets a lot of water, but then it dries out. And so this is a great plant, very easy. So Jenny said, I am trying to put more natives in my yard. Could you please identify whether or not the perennials are native to our area? I will do that. I will tell you a lot of what I've probably shown, and maybe even a lot of what I've grabbed, are not super what I would call native plants. We do carry a lot of natives, Jenny, and we can definitely recommend some of those for you. And maybe that's a great topic for a webinar in the future, is native plants. And I think natives are great to use. However, a lot of native plants, typically, especially in like the shrub world, are not super exciting because you don't see them when you're driving around on the interstate. You see things like dogwoods and red buds. Those are great looking trees, and those are grown as ornamental plants. But a lot of ornamental plants, natives, are not super ornamental in this area. However, there's a lot of great ones. I mean, we sell like the milkweed. We've got a milkweed that is a native milkweed, which is great for the butterflies. And we've got a lot of other perennials that work into that native categories as well. So Jenny, I will definitely mention them if I've got any, but I don't know that I grabbed a whole lot of natives, to be honest. So I definitely mention them if I've got them. And Andrew said, what is your area? Replying to Jenny. Don't iris do better when some of the tuber is exposed? Yes, great point, Barb. So you want to plant these right level with the soil or just above grade. So you don't want them to get too deep in the soil. That's usually the biggest issue that if anybody ever experiences with a iris is planting them too deep. So you don't want to cover this area up. You want to let that tuber just be right below the surface of the soil. So only about an inch or 2 of soil on top, that's about it. So the best thing to do is get them growing like this and just plant them right level with the ground because they're planted at the right height, or just above grade, if anything. But irises are easy. There's some variegated forms as well, and I just love that striking modern foliage and how easy they are to clean up and create that really modern look, which I think is very cool and different looking. Reminds me of like a Sansevieria snake plant, just kind of interesting one. So irises are a good option and very, very durable. I didn't bring cast iron plant in, but cast iron plant, hence the name, is a very, very tough one. It can grow in shade to even a little bit of sun, but looks very similar to that. We don't have a huge selection of them, which is why I didn't grab them, but cast iron plant is another great option. All right, so then of course salvias. Man, and there's a huge selection of salvias. So many different types of salvias out there. I grabbed this one because this is called black and blue salvia. It's one of my favorites. But there's a huge assortment of salvias, and they can grow anywhere from 3 to 4 feet high. Some of them stay a little bit smaller, some of the dwarf varieties. But this one gets about 3 to 4 feet high and wide, and it has this amazing black bud and then this kind of bluish colored bloom that pops out of it. So really, really cool plant. I love this one just because I think the leaf is really pretty. It's kind of got that waxy leaf to it. But there's tons and tons of different types of salvias out there, and this is a great one. And Jenny, there's some native salvias for sure to this area, but this one is not a native, I don't believe. But there's a lot of different salvias out there. Salvias generally grow from zones 7 to 10 naturally, and they're fairly deer resistant. So sometimes deer will graze on these, sometimes they'll pick off the buds. So if you live in a very, very populated area with a lot of deer, then you might consider doing something different than irises or protecting them a little bit. There's lots of great repellents that you can use to protect your plants if you've got deer issues or rabbit issues and you gotta have that specific plant. I'll mention hostas when we get to the shade. Hostas are a favorite of the deer and rabbits, of course. And so if you gotta grow hostas, we've got solutions for you as well. But salvias are great, lots and lots of different varieties of them. Red blooms, purple blooms, pink blooms, I mean, you name it, salvia's got it, and lots of different sizes too, which is why I love it so much, because there's a salvia for you no matter what size it is. So Catherine, this is called black and blue salvia, hence because of the black bud and then that blue kind of bluish colored purple bloom. Really, really pretty one. One of my favorite salvias. Super easy to grow. Sometimes you'll get a lot of hummingbirds attracted to it as well. Great for butterflies. They'll be on it. But this is a great option for lots and lots of different spaces. And there's lots of different colors and different sizes, which is why I love it. Sherry said, for iris, is west evening sun okay? Yes. So iris really can take anything. I mean, I've seen them growing in shade. They don't typically bloom as well in shade, but they will bloom in full sun, and that west evening sun is perfectly fine for irises. You'll do perfectly well there with them. But salvia, great option. I could have grabbed probably 10 different varieties that we have right now, but salvias, bloom from early spring, almost mid-spring, all the way till fall. This one, black and blue salvia, tends to start a little bit later, so it needs a little bit more warmth before it starts to bloom, but this is a great option. Very, very easy to grow, very, very reliable, tried and true perennial for sure, black and blue salvia. All right, the next one is ruela, or ruellia. So this is Mexican petunia, which is the common name that a lot of people use for it, but this is a great plant. Ruellia, or ruela, is a really, really easy one to grow. It's fairly deer resistant, doesn't have a lot of issues. The zones are going to be 8 to 11, so it's got a little bit of a tighter range on your zones, a little bit more on the tropical side. So if you're a little bit further up north, I think I saw, Jenny, you were in 7B, so you're going to have a little bit of an issue when we get into the colder climates. A little bit more tropical. It's a great perennial though in this area in Virginia Beach, and even in Newport News and Hampton and on the peninsula, maybe even up into Williamsburg, you'll probably be okay. You might want to protect it in a cold winter, and it's going to go dormant. So once we have a frost, it's going to go completely kind of dormant. The foliage on the top is going to die off, and you just cut it to the ground. You can put a little heap of mulch over it if you're in a colder climate or you're worried about the winter. Put a little mulch over top. That'll keep the root system warm. But this is great. Very similar to like a hibiscus in the fact that the blooms only last a day, but the blooms are awesome. That really deep kind of purple, almost bluish color. I love the stem. It's a really dark stem. Let me pull this out so you can see it a little bit better. And these can grow in a very kind of wet area too. So we used to actually keep them in a kind of a pond type of area. So it's a marginal plant if you're growing in a wet kind of pond zone. But it's a great plant, very easy to grow. Once it's established, it's actually very drought tolerant. But it's a really, really cool looking plant. They get about 4 feet high. So they get about 3 to 4 feet high, I think is what I wrote down. Yeah, 3 by 3, 4 by 4, somewhere in that range. But it's a really great perennial, and the clump gets bigger and bigger each year. And it is deer resistant, so it's a really, really good option. So Mexican petunia or ruela. Really, really cool plant. So I think Frida said, how do you keep salvia to keep blooming? So Frida, deadheading definitely helps. So you're going to want to definitely deadhead, and it takes energy to produce those blooms. So Frida, I would recommend getting on some sort of fertilizer regiment. I would use our green leaf plant food. I got it sitting over there. I'll grab it here in a little bit if you want to see it. But if you're in our area and you shop with us, we've got it at all of our locations, our green leaf plant food. After you deadhead it, so after you take off those dead blooms, and the cool thing about salvia is you can cut it a little bit lower, especially if you're growing just kind of some of the normal varieties. Black and blue is slightly different. It's a little bit bushier, a little bit bigger. but some of the lower growing varieties, you can just kind of buzz off the top. Just takes your head shears and just clip off the top, give it a little bit of a feed, and that'll give it the energy to kind of help bloom again. Now, if it still doesn't seem to be wanting to bloom, then we can go with something like a blooming and rooting formula that'll help add a little bit more phosphorus to help kind of kick it into gear again. And then Lillian said, are irises invasive? I don't consider them to be invasive, not in our area at least, not in the Hampton Roads area. They do spread, so it's a tuber, and they're going to spread, but you can go and divide them and spread and share them with neighbors, but they're not spreading aggressively, so it's nothing like bamboo or the Chinese wisteria, those types of things that really do kind of spread like crazy and are very hard to control. It'd be easy to control irises. It's easy to get them out of the ground. And they're not going to pop back from like a single little tiny hair of a root. So no, I don't consider them to be invasive. All right, so let's see, what's next? Oh, catmint. Catmint is a great one. So I know we were talking earlier about a low-growing, drought-tolerant, easy to grow, blooming perennial. There's lots and lots of different types of catmints now, and this is a very, very reliable plant. This one that I grabbed is called Cat's Meow. Catmint is not catnip. Catmint is a blooming perennial that deer absolutely hate. So if you got deer or rabbit issues, this is a great one. Once it's established, it's extremely drought tolerant and very, very easy to grow in full sun. This one, I believe, only gets about 18 inches. Yeah, 18 inches high and wide. So it's a little bit of a shorter one. I've seen them get as big as 3 by 3, 4 by 4. Sometimes they can be a little wild looking. So it depends on the variety. I've even seen some ground cover types of varieties. So there's lots and lots of choices. I love that kind of blue-green foliage you can see in there. So it's got that kind of bluish color, and then almost all the blooms are going to be somewhere in the light lavender, blue to darker purple colors. But catmint is a great option. Most catmint varieties grow in zones 3 to 9, so a great option there. Wide range of zones to grow this in, and they are very, very deer resistant. Deer do not like catmint at all. So really great option. Got a little fragrance, kind of like a minty fragrance to it, but that bloom just keeps on kicking all the way from about late spring, so they kind of just started in our area, all the way through summer, and just keeps on going. And butterflies and bees absolutely love these. So a great pollinator plant, and a very, very easy one to grow in full sun, especially if you've had an area that you've had not a lot of success growing something, kind of similar to like the iris situation, where we want to put something that we know is going to be very, very reliable. This is a great option. Catmint, lots and lots of different sizes too, which I love. So when you get a plant like Salvia or catmint that offers you a wide range in size and shape and habit, that's a great thing. I mean, where you can get one that grows as a ground cover all the way to a shrub size, 3 by 3, 4 by 4, somewhere in that range. But Cat's Meow just happens to be a slightly smaller variety, and there's lots and lots of choices. A little bit more neat and compact habit on this variety, where most of them kind of get a little bit, like I said, a little bit wild looking, which I love for like a pollinator garden, or a border or something, planting in masses. Plant these in masses and they'll put on a show all summer long for you. Really great one. And there's lots and lots of choices of catmint. All right, the next one I'm sure a lot of you all know is Rudbeckia, or black-eyed Susan. So this is Goldstrom. There's a lot of different types of Rudbeckia, but Goldstrom is one of the old, classic, super reliable plants. Rudbeckia grows in zones 4 to 9. This one gets about 2 feet high by about 2 to 3 feet wide. A little bit of a spreading habit, but not super aggressive and not invasive by any means. But really great looking plant, and it blooms all summer long with these bright yellow blooms with that black center. I'm sure you've all seen black-eyed Susan before. Let me see it. There we go. Focus on that. So really easy plant. Great for bees and butterflies. It's a great looking plant. I don't think it's a native. I know somebody was asking earlier if it's a native. I don't think this variety is native, but there are some native Rudbeckias. So this is a great looking plant. We almost never see them bloom here in the garden center, which is so funny because they usually fly in and out of here. They're a great option, especially in a mass planting. I love these. If you can get like 5 to 7 of them in an area, it'll just kind of fill that area and bloom with that profuse blooms. And then they go to seed and the birds love them. So it's a great option for our native wildlife and pollinators. It's a really, really easy plant to grow. Once this is established, it's almost indestructible. So get it through the first summer, maybe watch it the second summer, but other than that, you'll never have a problem with it. So Rudbeckia, zones 4 to 9. This one, the Goldstrom, gets about 2 feet high by about 3 feet wide. So Black-Eyed Susan is the state flower in Maryland. So it's pretty close to being a native to this area. And very deer resistant, deer and rabbit resistant. So great option, Rudbeckia, Black-Eyed Susan, lots of different varieties too. They grow in different shapes and sizes. I know there's a dwarf variety of the Goldstrom that I think I just saw and I didn't grab it. I just grabbed Goldstrom because it is the original, kind of the tried and true Rudbeckia. Really great option. So sorry we don't get to see it bloom here, so you don't get to see it bloom either. But if you've never grown one and you've got a dry kind of space or an area that again is a tough spot that you want a perennial to kind of naturalize the area, Rudbeckia Goldstrom is one of the best. Okay, next one is a grass. Now there's lots and lots of different types of grasses out there. Very easy to grow your ornamental grasses. Lots and lots of choices. This is probably one of my favorites because it is a very tried and true perennial. Now grasses, a lot of people consider maybe even to be a shrub. I consider them to be a perennial typically. They're going to go dormant in the winter here. So they're going to go, so Andrew said, is there a low growing Rudbeckia? I know there's a dwarf of the Goldstrom that I saw out there. So Andrew, I'll get back to you on that. But yes, I know I don't know if there's a ground cover type of Goldstrom, Rudbeckia. But I know there's a dwarf of this Goldstrom, which looks almost identical. It only gets about 1.5 feet tall and spreads to about 3 feet wide. So that might work for you. I'll have to get the name of it. I think I can't remember. It's some sort of miniature or I think it's got miniature in the name. But yes, there's lots and lots of different varieties of Rudbeckia. So back on the grass, this is Miscanthus adagio. This is my favorite variety. It's a very sharp grass, so you gotta be careful with it. If you run your hand opposite of the blade, then it's almost like a razor blade, and really either way you go. It's a very sharp bladed grass. So if you go opposite, if you go into the plant, you'll feel all these little razor blades kind of trying to cut you up. So definitely wear gloves when you go to prune it or clean it up, but it's a great plant. Lots of insects, good insects like ladybugs and even butterflies. I always put a grass in a pollinator garden because a lot of times they'll go in there to hide or form into their chrysalis. So it's a really great plant to kind of keep some of those good insects like ladybugs and lacewings and praying mantis you find a lot of times in the grass. Those are great bugs, and they're going to find kind of a protected area, and this is a great protected area because the birds won't be able to get in there and get to them. But Miscanthus adagio is this one. There's again a wide range, anywhere from I'd say 1 by 1, even 6 by 6 inch, like the blue dune fescue is a really low growing grass, little bunny. Then this one gets about 4 by 4, and then of course pampas grass. That pampas grass can get 10 to 12 feet high and wide. But this one's a great easy size, 3 by 3, 4 by 4, somewhere in that range. Most of your grasses are going to be somewhere, especially your Miscanthus, are going to be somewhere in zones 5 to 9. So a little bit of a wide range there. I love it when they go dormant in the winter and they turn kind of that brown color. I leave it. I think it's better to leave them. Leave them brown. And then in the spring, cut them back before the new growth emerges. And that's typically going to be around the March to early April timeframe. So is usually when I'll go and cut them back. We don't want to cut them back too early, especially in like that January timeframe. If you get a heavy snow, that can rot the crown out. So you don't want to get a lot of piled up snow in there. So leaving this grass, the brown grass, actually helps protect it. It's got a slight variegation to it. It's got a slight white stripe in it. There's lots and lots of different types of zebra grasses out there that are pretty easy to grow. Some can be a little invasive, so be careful with your different varieties. Most of your Miscanthus are going to stay in clump form, and then each year the clump gets bigger and bigger. So this one gets about 3 by 3. And great little plumes that come out right out of the top. I think we all know, oh, now I'm going to forget the name. Muhlenbergia, the muhly grass, the pink muhly grass is a great one. And Sherry said, isn't pampas grass invasive? No, and I've never seen it really popping up in different locations. A lot of people don't grow it because it's super big. It's a huge grass. It gets, 10 by 10 to, 10 feet high by 10 feet wide. It's a huge grass. It's a lot of work. Great for shopping centers and stuff like that. You see a lot of them in shopping centers because they can get nice and big. They're just kind of a pain to kind of cut back. So pampas grass tends to not be used as much anymore, but it's not invasive in the fact that it's not going to pop up in different locations. It's hard to dig up. So if you have a big clump of it, it's very, very hard to kind of dig up and move or to remove. But Sherry, other than that, they're not super invasive. They're not going to spread and take over. Love the plumes on pampas grass. You can't beat that huge white plume. But this is a great one. I don't know if you can quite see that picture in there. So you can kind of see it's kind of got that wheatgrass kind of looking plume on the top. It's a really, really easy grass to grow. And grasses are great whether you're on, on the beach with sand or you got clay soil. Grasses can take it wet, dry. They really like a good amount of sun. But other than that, grasses are extremely versatile to the area that you grow them in, and deer resistant, and a good zone range of 5 to 9. All right, so the next one is dianthus. Now, dianthus we typically carry a lot of in the spring, so I've got this little tiny dianthus. This one's called Fire Witch. Fire Witch dianthus is one of my favorite varieties. We almost always carry it. So this one looks a little tiny and kind of cute, but this can get kind of tallish. Fire Witch typically gets about 12 to 18 inches high, about 24 inches wide. Most of your dianthus is going to be, your perennial dianthus is going to be in zones 3 to 9. So it's got a pretty good wide range of zones. So if you're a little bit further north, you're going to do fine with it. I love the bluish colored grass and those pink blooms, but now they come in pink, they come in red, white, even like a lemon color. So lots and lots of different types of blooms. You can get rosette blooms that are big and full, almost like a rose. Then you can get these little kind of frilly ones. Some people call them, I think it's like cheddar or cheater pinks or something like that. Yeah, cheddar pinks. See, I knew it was something like that. So really, really great perennial. It's almost somewhat evergreen too. So in our area, if we have a fairly mild winter, this foliage will stay almost blue throughout the winter. The thing that I love about dianthus is it's deer resistant, wide range in sizes again, but a very kind of cool clumping looking grass and easy to deadhead. You do want to deadhead them to keep them blooming. But what I love is you can see those bloom heads pop up above the kind of grassy foliage. So when you get a plant that is kind of starting to kind of get to the end of its blooming cycle, then you can just go in and just kind of cut it right off the top. You can even grab it by the top and just cut all those seed heads off, and it'll keep on blooming. Give it a little bit of feed after that, a little bit of green leaf plant food, and it'll keep on growing, and it'll really, really do well for you. But dianthus is great. It's really, really easy to grow. And can take a wide range of soils too. So once it's established, it's very drought tolerant, it's very easy to grow. Let's see, I think I saw another. Can you grow catmint under trees? Darlene, you can. It's probably not going to bloom super well for you. The only thing about catmint is it loves sun. So it depends if it's getting a good amount of morning sun, a little bit of afternoon sun, if it's cutting in there and getting enough. You'd want to get at least 5 to 6 hours of sun for catmint to really do well. And the reason I say that is because that foliage is kind of fuzzy. When you get a fuzzy foliage and it's getting too much shade, you could run into powdery mildew issues. And that would be something that I have seen on catmint before, that's getting too much shade. So probably, Darlene, for you, I would recommend waiting till I get to my shade plants. I've got some good options for you to grow underneath a tree in the shade. So finish up here on the dianthus. Fairly deer resistant. Sometimes deer will pick at them a little bit, especially the blooms, because they pop up above the foliage. They don't typically mess with the foliage, but sometimes you'll get them on the blooms. So if you got a big deer population, might not be the right plant for you, or we can protect it. But this is a great option. Gets, like I said, about 12 to 18 inches high, 24 inches wide, but there's a huge variety of different types of dianthus. There's even some annual varieties of dianthus that a lot of us grow. Really, really good spring and fall kind of annual, but this is a great perennial one. Almost all the perennial ones have this bluish colored foliage, so it's easy to kind of tell. If your dianthus has a green foliage, I'm not going to say it isn't a perennial, but most likely it's an annual variety, but this dianthus with the blue foliage is almost always a perennial. Really great option. All right, so the next one is Coreopsis. So Coreopsis is a great one. This is one of my favorites, is what I think a lot of people call like a fern leaf Coreopsis, or a tick seed. You might have heard that name before, but this one's called Zagreb. There's also one called Moonshine, but this is one of my favorite Coreopsis. There's a lot of different types of Coreopsis out there. Once they're established, extremely drought tolerant. I find this one to have the least amount of issues because of this kind of fine leaf to it. I think it kind of looks like parsley almost, but this thing will get really nice and rounded in shape. So it's got a really cool kind of defined shape. It almost looks like a shrub. And then it just all of a sudden, all those blooms open up with that yellow bloom. It's just absolutely stunning. Typically only blooms for a certain season, typically summertime. And you might get some blooms here and there, especially if you deadhead it, give it a little shear, give it a little food, see if it comes back and blooms for you again. But those blooms last a long time. It's a really, really great perennial. So this one, let's see, I think I wrote it down, gets about 2 by 2, 3 by 3, but there's a lot of different types of Coreopsis out there, and they can grow in a bunch of different sizes. You probably see a lot of Coreopsis with more of like a daisy or coneflower looking type of bloom. Those are very, very common. They tend to have more powdery mildew, fungus issues, and tend to be a little bit more wild looking, which is why I love this Coreopsis, because it forms in this nice little globe shape. It's very, very easy to grow and has very minimal issues that I've ever seen with it. So it's a really, really great one because of that, because it forms that nice kind of shrub shape. I just love the look of that plant. It looks very, very fern-like. Really, really easy, very, very drought tolerant plant as well. So once it's established, does really, really well, full sun and deer resistant. Let's see, I think I put, full deer resistance, doesn't have any issues with messing with it. So it's a really, really great plant. Lots and lots of different types of Coreopsis out there. But this is one of my favorite called Zagreb, or at least that's how I've always pronounced it, Z-A-G-R-E-B. So I can show you the tag there. See if it zooms in on it. So Coreopsis Zagreb. And then of course there's Moonshine as well, which is a very, very common variety too. So this one says 12 inches high, 12 to 18 inches high and wide. So just a nice little shrub shape. But there's some that get 3 feet. There's some that stay as low as 1 feet. You probably see like the little ground cover one a lot in the spring. That's another great variety of Coreopsis. And a lot of them have different bloom times too. So if you love Coreopsis and they're doing really well for you, you can probably find one that you can mix a bunch of different sizes and shapes and different habits as well. So Coreopsis has got to be on my tried and true list. All right, what else we got? So Phlox. I think you all know Phlox. Creeping Phlox are really, really common. I don't have creeping Phlox right now. Creeping Phlox we carry in the spring, and then they tend to they only bloom in the spring, but there's also tall Phlox. And tall Phlox is a really, really great one. This one's called Flame Pink. You might also know it as Garden Phlox, but I love the foliage on Phlox. Really, really great one. So Phlox are zone 4 to 8. However, tall Phlox are typically a little bit slightly different. This says zone 4, but so think about that, zone 4 to 8, and we're about an 8A, 8B, somewhere in that range. So we're right on the precipice of this being too warm. So when you get down into like deeper parts of North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, then you won't be able to grow tall Phlox. So this is definitely a little bit more of a northern plant. And in this area, if you ever have issues with it, it's going to be powdery mildew. Darlene, do any of these grow under trees? The iris would be fine under trees, but I'm going to get to some shade perennials here in a minute that'll do great underneath your trees, because I would assume that you have a fair amount of shade there. But tall Phlox gets about anywhere from 18 to 24 inches high and wide. Some varieties can get up to 3 to 4 feet, but the only issue that you'll ever have with it in this area is powdery mildew. And that's because it doesn't love humidity. Now, I've seen them in gorgeous gardens and do perfectly fine. I've seen them in a little bit of shade and they do okay because they're protected from that heat and that humidity. However, in shade also breeds the powdery mildew issues. So keep it out in full sun is what I recommend. The butterflies love it. It's a great butterfly attractant. And you can see just by that picture there, that bloom. Really, really great looking bloom. Another one of those plants that we typically don't see blooming here at the garden center because they tend to go so fast. But this is a great perennial, really, really pretty bloom. And they come in lots of different colors too, from whites to kind of almost lavenders to the pinks and even reds. So tall Phlox, is a great one. I brought it also because creeping phlox is a really, really tried and true perennial. Great for rock gardens because they can trail over rocks. Very, very drought tolerant plant. And it is green right now and it looks like just a ground cover, but it blooms in the spring. So good option. Phlox are really, really reliable. All right, I'm going to keep rolling here and try and pick up the pace here. I've only got about maybe 10 more to go, but the next one is Purple Heart. So you probably all have seen this hanging basket hanging here, and you're wondering what that is. It is Purple Heart. Purple Heart is one of my favorite ground covers for a perennial. Now, it does go dormant in the winter. A lot of people think it might be evergreen. It's not. It looks great in hanging baskets. Awesome in containers. So if you're doing a container with different types of plants and annuals, I always love to mix perennials in. This one really, really likes full sun. It's very, very drought tolerant. It's very succulent in nature. Kind of feels like a succulent. The botanical name is Secretia, so it's a weird kind of name. I always bring that up because I think it's kind of funny. But it does get these little pink blooms on it. So you can see these little tiny kind of pink, almost lavender colored blooms, which really is a striking comparison to that dark purple foliage. I love purple in the landscape, and this is a really, really drought tolerant one. It can spread. It only gets about a foot tall, so you can see kind of, you'll get those spikes up that'll get about foot, maybe 18 inches tall, but it'll spread up to 5 feet. So 3 to 5 feet spread, just awesome, very, very reliable. Once we get a frost, it kind of melts off. You get up all that old foliage, and then next year it just pops right out of the ground. It's also very easy to root, so if you've got like a big one like this and something breaks off, you can always just stick it in the soil and it roots pretty easily. So it's a really, really great perennial. And you can always tell a good aggressive plant by feeling the container, and there's lots of root system kind of coming out the bottom of the holes. That's great. That means it's a strong plant, very, very durable. Zones on Purple Heart is 7 to 10, so a little bit of a shorter range there of where you can grow this, but zone 7 to 10, so it grows in this area very well, and it's fairly deer resistant. I have some in my yard. Sometimes the deer pick at them a little bit, but you can't kill the stuff, so they haven't killed it. So sometimes I'll come by and I'll be like a little frustrated, but other than that, they typically don't mess with it too much, so fairly deer resistant. So Purple Heart, a great ground cover for those sunny areas. I think somebody earlier was asking for a clay, tough area to grow something. Purple Heart would be a great option. So the next one is Sedums, which would also fit into that category. There's lots and lots of different types of perennial Sedums that come back year after year, even some that are evergreen. This one is evergreen. This is Sedum Angelina. Stone crop is what you might also know it by. Lots of different varieties in there. Angelina is this one. Gets a little yellow flower in the summer. Doesn't really show up extremely well because you get this lime green foliage. I love this foliage. It's awesome. Great in containers again, rock gardens, but even just a great ground cover by itself. And the reason I love Sedum Angelina is because it's almost indestructible, but also it's evergreen, and in the winter it kind of gets this maroon color. You can almost see some of that maroon in there. See it on the edge of those leaves right there? Really pretty little maroon color, but it almost turns completely maroon in the winter. It does great in full sun. A little bit of shade is actually not too bad on it. It's not going to hurt it too bad. Great in containers. Really, really great option. There's a couple other sedums that I brought in because there's a lot of choices on them. This is another one. Look at the different type of foliage here on this guy. So almost looks like it's got a regular leaf. This one's called Little Miss Sunshine. I brought this one because it's got a really cool bloom. This whole thing stays really low to the ground, really flat, and the whole thing will almost turn kind of yellow. Kind of similar to ice plant. I didn't grab any ice plant. Ice plant is another very, very durable kind of sedum type of plant, but ice plant is a good one, but this one's a great one. And then I didn't bring the dragon's blood in. Dragon's blood is purple, almost like a dark maroon, not quite like this, but almost more like this color here. We'll get to this plant here in a second, but almost that kind of maroon color. Dragon's blood is a really, really popular one. It's evergreen as well and is super, super low to the ground. This is John Creech. John Creech is one of the originals. People love this one because it's got that great little leaf to it. And you can see it gets little pink blooms in the summer. But it's a great one in containers because it trails, but it's also a great ground cover because it stays nice and low. So if you've got a sandy soil, a clay soil, something that dries out really well, you're going to be perfectly happy with these. It can take a little bit of moisture, and it's okay if you got some moisture on it. That's fine. But these do great in very dry conditions and a very easy plant to grow. And it's a great ground cover. Full sun for sure. You definitely want to get more sun on it than anything else for sure. All right, so sedums in general are zones 3 to 11, huge range. There's actually Sedum Autumn Joy, which is one that I don't know that I saw out there. I don't know if we have it right now, but we do typically carry it throughout the year. I love Sedum Autumn Joy. It forms like a shrub. I mean, it gets somewhere in the 24, maybe even 36-inch height, and just perfectly kind of round, looks really, really cool. It does go dormant in the winter, so it completely dies off, comes back each year, bigger and better, and it gets these huge blooms on the top, these huge pink blooms that bees will just like swarm to, and they just kind of like crawl around on, and they're just look like they're in heaven. So Sedum Autumn Joy would be a taller one, but there's a huge diversity in sedums and pretty deer resistant. So again, you would think some of these succulent type of plants like Purple Heart and sedums are deer resistant, but sometimes they'll come through and graze on them. So again, higher deer population, higher rabbit issues, then maybe not the best plants for you, but we've got a lot on this list. So, and a lot of them are almost completely deer resistant, like Verbena and stuff like that. All right, so the next two I'm going to breeze through real quick. These are kind of different oddballs that I threw in there. I wanted to bring in mint. Because there's a lot of herbs that are perennial. You know, you think of like oregano is pretty much evergreen, thyme is pretty much evergreen, mint is a great option, chives, a lot of parsleys will make it through the winter. So herbs are a great perennial. That's why we sell them in perennials. Now, some things like basil and cilantro you got to plant every year, but mint is a great option, especially in an area that's hard to grow something. It can grow in sun, even a little bit of shade. This is mojito mint, which is one of my favorite varieties. It gets about 18 to 24 inches tall, so it's actually going to put some height on it, and then it'll spread forever. So be careful. I wouldn't call it invasive necessarily. I know Sherry's about to ask me, is it invasive? But it'll spread for sure. It'll spread into a confined area. Invasive typically also means that it might actually kill other plants, and mint's not going to kill other plants. It's just going to spread into any kind of open area. So a lot of people grow it in containers. You can grow it in hanging baskets. It's great. Love the fragrance of mint. When you walk through it, this one's great for drinks. It's got that big leaf, so great for your teas and your mojitos in the summer. But this is a great one, mint mojito. But if you're looking for something to kind of cover some space and it's a tough area to grow in, then mint might be a great option for you. But it will spread, so I do warn you, it'll spread. I just thought I'd bring it in there because it's a very tried and true perennial. It'll usually almost never go away. Some winters it almost goes completely dormant, but a lot of winters it's evergreen. So mint is an awesome option. Strawberries are another one. Oh, and deer don't mess with mint. So mint is zones 4 to 10. Deer don't mess with it, and it usually gets somewhere between 1 to 3 feet high and wide, but will spread endlessly if you let it. Strawberries are another one, not deer resistant. Deer will gobble these things up, of course, but it's a great one if you don't have deer issues because one, it provides strawberries. I love these ever-bearing varieties. There's lots and lots of ever-bearing varieties. So you'll see here on the side it says ever-bearing. Ever-bearing means that it produces not a ton of fruit, but it produces it all summer long. Whereas June-bearing is going to produce a ton of fruit in about June, and then it's going to stop for the rest of the season. So mixing a couple different varieties in there is not a bad idea, but the ever-bearing, especially as you start to form that patch, and it's also a great ground cover, and that's why I brought it in here, because it's semi-evergreen, and in the winter they turn almost like this maroon kind of fall-looking kind of reddish maroon color. I love strawberries in the landscape. I think they're really cool. Good little ground cover, attract some native wildlife, which is good, and you also can pick some strawberries. If there's a problem with strawberries, it's slugs. It's almost always slugs, and of course if you have deer, but slugs will get in there, so definitely have some sort of slug control. Hopefully you don't have slugs, but if you do, then they'll love your strawberry patch and they'll love you for it. So you'll have to do a little bit of, we've got some natural slug and snail killer that is completely safe for your edible crops. But also safe for pets and other things, but will kill slugs and keep them out of your strawberry patch if that's something you want to grow. But it's also a great ground cover, like I mentioned. All right, so breeze through those last few, but that's all my sun ones. Let's see, Sherry said, I have a slug and snail issue. How do I get rid of them? They even eat my mint. Yeah, Sherry, slugs will get into a lot of different things. Hostas, the hibiscus, mint, strawberries, and there are some good options for you. We've got a strong one that is a traditional method. We've also got a organic one that is very, very safe, and that's the one I was just mentioning. It's made by Natural Guard. It's called Slug and Snail Bait. It's basically spinosad, So it's that, and I think maybe iron phosphate or something mixed in there. I can't remember the active ingredients, but I know spinosad is one of them. If you get something with that in there, if you can come see us, Sherry, we've got great options. It's a granular. You just sprinkle it around in the area. They'll get attracted to it. They crawl over to it. They consume it. They roll over it, and it hurts them. There's also diatomaceous earth, which would be another option for you. Powder to us feels like a nice silky powder. To slugs and snails, it's like glass, and so when they crawl over, it slices them up. A little bit grosser. I like the spinosad personally. All right, so now we're moving on to shade. So shade perennials, absolutely love them. I don't have a huge list. I've got 5, but these 5 are awesome, and there's lots and lots of different forms of them. And they're pretty much almost all evergreen. We'll start with the first one that's not. So what's the potted plant to your right? What is that again? This one is a Mexican petunia or ruela. It's a really, really easy perennial. Great one. I only carry it in the 3-gallon size right now. Sometimes you can get in the 1 gallon, but it's an awesome one. It's about 3 by 3. Deer resistant. Blooms last a single day, but they bloom profusely all summer long. A little bit more tropical, so it's only hardy from zones. Let's say I wrote it down. I can never remember my zones off the top of my head. Mexican petunia is zones 8 to 11. So really, really nice one. All right, so back to the shade. The first one I'm going to start with is not evergreen, but hostas. I mean, we all know hostas. Hostas, love hostas. They're very easy to grow. So as long as you don't have a lot of deer or rabbit issues, hostas are awesome in the shade. So many different colors. I love that kind of neon green, that chartreuse green. Brightens up a shady location. Of course, the white and green variegated. This is the Patriot Hosta. And huge range in size. Some that get 6 inches by 6 inches, the little dwarf miniature varieties. And then some that get huge, like the Emperor's Wu, that can get like 4 to 5 feet high and wide. This is Summon Substance, which I grabbed because it's got that huge neon green leaf, but also because it's a bigger one. So this one's going to go 3 feet high by 4 feet wide. Just awesome plants. They do have a little bit of spreading habit, but usually it's the main clump that gets bigger and bigger each year. But lots and lots of different types of hostas. Absolutely love them. They're great in containers. I've had some in a container for a long time because I have deer and I can't plant them in my yard, so I keep them up on my porch or patio. But this is a great option. Hostas are amazing in the shade. Lots and lots of different colors. You know, you can get the guacamole that's got the kind of dark green with the lime green inside. Then you've got your white and green variegated. You got your straight green ones. You got miniatures. You got huge ones. You got blue ones. So there's lots and lots of different options in the hosta world, and they are very easy to grow. They require shade. So what is shade? Shade is typically, for me, for most of these plants, is afternoon shade. It's not going to get any of that afternoon sun. It can get sun all morning long up till about noon, 1 o'clock, and then it needs shade the rest of the day. Now, if you get shade or sun in the morning, let's say for a couple hours, underneath a tree, so Darlene, these are for you, unless you got deer. I will say, typically hostas like a little bit of moisture, so they don't love a super dry area. But underneath the tree, if you can get a good patch of soil and it's not a large tree with a huge root system, then these will do great. Hostas are amazing. Really great coloration in them as well. Most hostas are zones 3 to 9, so really you can grow a pretty wide range of them across the country. They can get any size, I mean, from miniature to gigantic, 4 by 4, 5 by 5. I've seen huge ones. They are not deer resistant or rabbit resistant. So our hostas perennial in any zones, in pretty much all zones. They are perennial. They're pretty much almost all going to go dormant. When you get down to, let's see, zones 3 to 9. So when you get down into like, North Carolina, Georgia, they're pretty much still going to go dormant. I mean, they get cold enough there that those plants are going to get a frost and they're going to kind of defoliate. You cut them off at the ground and they come back each year. But hostas are super easy. Very easy plants to grow. I do think they do better with a little bit of moisture. So I don't usually plant them in a super dry shade area, but I got some options for you. But hostas, great range in color, great range in size, and can grow in a lot of different zones. And then almost all perennial, they all need that dormant period because they're similar to like a bulb. So they're going to need to go into that dormancy period. I'm sure that you can grow them as a year-round plant down in like Florida maybe, but I'm not quite sure. I don't know. So the next one is ferns. So lots and lots of different types of perennial ferns. So these are not like your Boston fern hanging baskets or your Kimberly Queen or macho ferns. There's lots and lots of houseplant or tropical ferns, but these are perennial ferns, and these grow in this area very, very well. Love them because they're deer resistant. Love them because they love the shade, even deep shade. Hostas can take almost all day shade. Ferns can take almost all day shade. So there's lots and lots of different varieties. I only grabbed two here. I'm going to show you this one. This is my personal favorite. This one's called the Autumn Brilliance, or this one's actually called Golden Mist. Different grower, different name, but Golden Mist, Autumn Brilliance, I love because that new frond comes out in that kind of really pretty autumn color. So Autumn Brilliance typically gets somewhere around 24 inches high and wide. Zones on most of your perennial ferns are 5 to 9. Pretty native, so I don't know that I carry the native varieties, but ferns are native to Virginia. There's some native ferns to Virginia. Most of the native ferns go dormant in the winter. This one's evergreen, which is why I love it so much, because it's there year-round. Now, typically, when we get into the hottest parts of the summer, you might get a little bit of this kind of crispiness on the edge. That's fairly normal, but it's easy to clean up. I love the feel of these ferns. Ferns have a natural spore that's on the underside of their leaf, so don't get afraid by that. It looks like insects have infected the bottom. That is completely natural, so don't worry about that too much. There's the holly fern, the holly Rockford fern, ostrich fern, tassel fern, autumn brilliance fern, and then the amazing Japanese painted fern. Look at this guy. Absolutely amazing. This one is called Godzilla painted fern. Really, really cool. Deer resistant. I don't know if this one's evergreen. I don't think the painted ferns are evergreen. I believe they go dormant in the winter. I'll have to check on that. But a really just amazing color in the shade. You get almost like these purpley tones with the new shoots. You get a little bit of like purple color, but then it's like this white variegated. Really, really awesome plant. I do think ferns need a little bit of moisture. They prefer a little bit of a moist soil typically. However, once established, they're pretty drought tolerant. I mean, they grow in the shade and they grow in the woodlands and the forest areas. You're typically going to find them a little bit closer to maybe a water source or in between in big spaces in between trees, but still getting shade. I've got a wooded area in my backyard. I've got some native ferns that are growing back there naturally, and they typically are down near kind of the water source, that main kind of creek area. But all day shade. I mean, they never get a lick of sunlight for sure. Dapple, they'll get a little bit of rays of sunlight through here and there. But ferns are great in containers too. I grew a holly Rockford fern in a container for about 5 to 6 years. I just planted it. I split it all up, planted a bunch of clumps in my landscape. I'm trying them in a little bit of a drier shade area, so I'll let you know how they turn out. But they do very, very well. So Sherry says, how do you keep ferns from getting crispy? Moisture. It's moisture, so they like to be somewhat moist. So when we start to get really hot in the summer, giving them a good soaking. And what I mean by good soaking is just letting the hose saturate that area. Don't do it often. Do a deep watering less often. So do it like maybe once a week. We've hit a very, very dry period right now. So if your ferns are looking a little like sagging, then go out and give them a good drink of water because we haven't had a lot of rain recently. But that's the best way to keep them from getting a little crispy. In the winter time frame, some of them will get crispy too, even when we have extreme cold weather. There's nothing you can really do about that except go and selectively clean them out. I'll usually wait till the spring, and sometimes I might just cut my fern right off to the ground and let the new fronds come out in the spring. So very, very easy to grow. I do believe this Japanese painted fern is not evergreen. But the autumn brilliance and the holly Rockford and the tassel ferns are all evergreen in this area. Barb said, are you going to do a webinar on pruning azaleas and hydrangeas? I did a whole webinar on hydrangeas, so you can always go back and watch all my webinars from the past. You can go to our McDonaldGardenCenter.com page, our webpage, and you can click on the Garden Guru tab, and it's got all my webinars on there. And I did one specifically about hydrangeas. I did one about azaleas. I did a general spring pruning webinar. So you can check those out. For azaleas, I won't get into hydrangeas because it's a long topic. You need to go back and watch that webinar. It was like an hour-and-a-half webinar on just hydrangeas. Talked a lot about pruning because there's different varieties that need to be pruned at different times. But basically, for azaleas and hydrangeas, you could say the best time and the safest time to prune them is when they're done blooming. So I know there's a lot of different types of hydrangeas now, but almost all of them put out a big bloom set. when as soon as they're done blooming, go in and give them a prune. Because if they bloom on old wood, you'll get the old wood. Azaleas, I know there's new varieties now too, with the encore and the reblooming type of azaleas. The best thing again is in the spring when they put out their big first bloom set. Give it a nice shear, then shape it. That's perfectly fine. And then you won't ruin the future blooms for sure. So hopefully that helps you, Barb. But go and check some of those old webinars out. I go into great detail into those. Okay, I got 3 more. We'll jump. I'm going to jump to one that's going to be a real short one, so I can finish with some of my favorites. This is Lismachia Goldilocks or Creeping Genia. So Creeping Jenny, Lismachia, they got a couple different names, but I absolutely love these. Now these can actually take full sun, but I love them in the shade because they get that bright color. In the sun, they typically will get a little bit more on the goldish color side, and sometimes in extreme drought or extreme heat, they might get a little crispy on the edges and they kind of burn the leaves a little bit. Won't kill it. You can't kill this stuff. It can grow in almost straight water, and it can grow in a fairly dry area when it's established. Great ground cover, but I absolutely love it in the shade. I also love it in containers because it'll trail over. So really, really pretty plant, great little ground cover. So really, really good one to try, especially for, I can't remember who it was that was asking about the area underneath trees. So Darlene, this would grow great underneath a tree. Really, really good option. Lismachia, great ground cover to be planted around a lot of other plants like ferns or the hostas, or my next one, which is hellebores. So it's not really truly hellebore season, but I wanted to show you this one because it's pretty much evergreen. It is very, very easy to grow. It's very, very durable. So Darlene, this one's for you. Very, very strong, durable shade plant. So if you're underneath a big tree, you're going to need to get it established. All plants need to get established. I just planted some of these underneath some big trees this spring. And I'm going to have to go out and water probably today when I get home, even though I prefer to do it in the morning. So maybe I'll try and push it and wait till the morning to water them. But they'll kind of sag when they need water. They'll kind of lay down a little bit. These still had a couple bloom heads on them. These have faded. These usually come out in white. They also come out in pink and burgundy. You can get a couple different shades of colors, but they bloom in the winter. So they're going to bloom around the January, February, March timeframe into April. They bloom for a long period. I mean, typically if they start in January, they're finishing up at the end of April. So a very, very long time frame. And you can leave the old blooms on here dried up because I think they're cool looking. Most of them are going to be kind of like a lime green. They go through different shades of colors, but they love shade. They can take a little bit of moisture, but they really prefer it to be kind of somewhat dry. So in a dry, shady location, these do really, really well, especially once they're established. You got to get them established, but they're very easy to grow. Hellebores grow in zones 6 to 9, so a little bit smaller range there, but they do very well here up to a little bit further north. Not very far down south, but hellebores are great. They get about 1 to 2 feet high and wide, so just kind of a nice little shrub. They're evergreen. I love this one because it's got that kind of variegated foliage, so these are pretty year-round. I can go in and cut these dead flower heads off or these drying up flower heads off if I wanted to. You can leave them on the plant. They make great cut flowers. Hellebores make great cut flowers. Really, really pretty cut flowers, and they are super deer resistant. Deer do not mess with these at all. So really, really great one. Hellebores, lots and lots of different varieties. Most of them get right around that 1 to 2 feet high and wide range and bloom when nothing else is blooming, which is why I love them, because they bloom in the winter. Nothing's blooming in the winter. And then sometimes you can get this really striking foliage on them. Most of them are just kind of a green foliage, but really, really kind of almost like a holly leaf. Got these serrated edges here. I don't know if you can see that. Really serrated edges, but just really tough plant. Really, really good one. All right, and then the last one I want to talk about is one of my all-time favorites, is heuchera or coral bells. Lots and lots of varieties of these, and that's why I love them so much, is because they're very easy to grow. Darlene, this might be a good one for you. It can take a little bit of moisture, but does pretty well in a dry, shady area as well. Again, need to get them established. Whenever we got big trees that are absorbing a lot of moisture, we got to be careful during these drier times. Get them through the first year, and then you're never going to have problems with them. I love these because they look great in containers. You know, mixing this with a combination of different types of plants is absolutely gorgeous. They have so many different colorations. I'm going to show you. I've grabbed at least 4 different varieties here. So this one happens to be called Orange Delight, Siren Songs Orange Delight by Monrovia. Really, really nice plant. I love these because of the foliage. They're evergreen. They grow in zones, let's see, heuchera, zones 4 to 9. All of them get right about 1 to 2 feet high and wide. Very easy to grow, deer resistant. Every once in a while the deer come through and mess with them. I just planted about, I think, 5 of them in an area underneath a tree. Deer were coming through that night. They love to inspect new plants, of course, and they pulled one up out of the ground. So, got one on me. I had to replace that. But other than that, deer really don't mess with them. Once they pick at them a couple times, they usually stay away from them. They don't like the leaf. It's kind of got a fuzzy nature to it. I love the fact that they have different colors on the undersides of the leaves. So when you get some wind blowing through the area, you can really see all the different leaf colors. Really cool looking plants. And there's so many different colors. Here's one that's got kind of that lime green color. And these do great in the shade. This one's called Little Cuties Sweet Tart. So this is another type of heuchera. A lot of people don't like the blooms on heucheras and they grow them for just the foliage. But as you can see on this one, look at that contrast, that pink to that lime green. And they bloom sporadically from spring all the way into fall. Really, really great. Evergreen. In extremely hot times and dry times, you might get some burning on the leaves, and extremely cold, you might get a little bit of burning on the leaves, but otherwise they're pretty much evergreen, and so it's a great shade plant, and this will brighten up a shady area, won't it? Let's see, we've got another one over here that I really thought was pretty. You can see all those blooms coming out on it. I mean, just look at that coloration. You got all the veins. You can see all the different vein colors. You've got kind of like the peachy color to lime green on the area that didn't get a lot of, much sunlight at all. More of the lime green color. Let's see, this one probably doesn't have its tag up. There it is. This is called Champagne, so Heuchera Champagne. Look at that. I just love the blooms on this one and just love that color. Really, really great plant. Very, very easy to take care of. Deer resistant, and then of course they come in those dark maroon colors as well. Look at that guy. So this one's called Berry Smoothie. So this is another Monrovia plant, but look at that foliage. Just cannot beat that. And then all the undersides are really dark colored. And then as the leaves kind of fade, even when they're starting to get a little crispy, you can see that those are starting to get a little old, but they've still got some cool color. Very easy to clean up too. You can just go in and kind of pinch them out with your hand and take out that kind of older leaf, and that'll help it put out new leaves. But heucheras, coral bells are absolutely amazing in the shady garden. Mix them with some hostas. I mean, you can't beat that contrast. Awesome, awesome. So mix them with hostas, ferns, heucheras, coral bells, hellebores. Those are some of the best shade plants out there, and they're almost all evergreen. Minus the hostas, they pretty much are year-round. And a huge range on the zones, so 4 to 9. So it grows in a wide range of zones, so not a very southern plant. A little bit more of a northern plant, likes it a little bit cooler, but does well with our heat and humidity in the summer and does well with our winters. And it's pretty much evergreen. So you can't beat these guys, and there's a ton of varieties. I mean, that's just 4. And I think we've got maybe 10 to 15 different varieties out there right now, and we carry a lot throughout the year. I mean, there was one I think that I had earlier that was called Silverberry. It was almost silver foliage. I mean, it was that maroon color, but it had like this silver film over the top. Really, really cool. So lots and lots of choices there as well. Those are my tried and true perennials. I mean, that's really it. I mean, and there's more coming in the future. So, we'll have to do this again. This is a new one I grabbed because I just think it's super cool. It's a fuchsia. So this is a Color Blast Deep Red Cape Fuchsia. So really cool looking plant. Let's see, I don't know much about it because we just got it in, but it quickly reaches 3 feet tall to 2 feet wide. Let's see, blooms summer into fall. Water when the top 2 inches of the soil are dry. Partial shade to partial sun, so it looks like it can take sun or shade. And just look at those tubular flowers. Really cool looking plant. So I think this one might be going home with me, and it might be finding a spot in my yard. It says an easy care, sensational bloomer providing vibrant, warm season color from mid-summer into fall. Showy clusters of flowers are loved by hummingbirds. What do you know? Those tubular shape. Perfect in sunny beds or containers, herbaceous perennial, may remain evergreen in mild winters. So I mean, hey, you can't beat that. I mean, that is awesome. And I think there's another variety that's a orangish color, even though this looks kind of orange to me, but it's called Deep Red Cape Fuchsia. Absolutely stunning looking plant. I love the foliage on it. It's got a really waxy leaf foliage to it, and it feels almost kind of like a succulent. It just looks strong. Sometimes you can tell plants are really, really good and durable because they just look strong. So this one might be a winter. will be a winner. It'll make it through the winter. But not your typical tropical looking fuchsia, just a different looking plant with these flower spikes. But I think I'm going to have to try some of these. It looks like this could be a winner and could be on my tried and true perennials in the future. So we're always getting new ones in, and there's always a lot of different ones. I mean, you think about the fall, we get another crop. When we start to get into summer, there's more that come in, like agastache, and there's a huge selection of perennials. And then, of course, mums are really, really easy to grow in the landscape, so you got lots of them. Darlene says, I have 5 beautiful hellebores. So you know the hellebores. So you got that one. You might try heucheras. If you don't have deer or rabbits, you might try hostas. And Lismachia is a great ground cover. So that's my list of my tried and true perennials for the Hampton Roads area. These are some of the best, easiest ones to grow. They don't have hardly any issues. A couple here and there. You might have to deadhead, might have to do some of that. But if you want reliable blooming plants, reliability on them coming back year after year, these are some of the best for this area in Hampton Roads. I hope you all got a lot out of this. If you've got any other questions, please feel free to fire away. If not, we will see you next week. Hopefully you join us as I plant up some. You'll actually get to see me planting up some succulent containers. So I'll be using these perennial succulents outside with hens and chicks. And doing a container that you can grow outdoors year round, and then I'll also do some that you can grow inside as well. Have you talked about lavender? Sherry, I haven't talked about lavender, and I didn't bring that one in as much as I think rosemary is a fairly easy one to grow. Sherry, I don't think lavender is the easiest plant to grow in the world. I think there's a lot of people that are successful with it, and I think you can be very successful with it. So think, where does lavender grow? Italy gets warm, right? They can take the heat. They just don't love the humidity. And so that's typically where people run into issues with lavender, Sherry, is the humidity in this area. So I typically would grow it in a container because you eliminate some of the humidity issues. If you've got clay soil, that's a little bit more like the Tuscany, the Italy kind of feel. So that helps. But it can get very, very dry. So the thing with lavender is having good airflow. Right? So we want to keep it out in full sun, and we want to make sure that it gets good airflow. And typically in a container, you're going to get a little bit better airflow. So I love my lavender in containers. You can keep it up near the porch or patio. You get that fragrance. It kind of keeps some of the insects away. But lavender is a great one, and if you get the right condition, you're going to be pretty successful with it. What you want to do is make sure you got good airflow. It's not congested up with a bunch of other plants. And once you get it through that kind of first year cycle, then you're pretty good. I would amend the soil with compost and perlite. I think that really helps with lavender. It kind of helps the airflow in the soil, helps kind of relieve the plant of the stress of the humidity. So that really, really helps. But if you're successful with lavender, then great, and go for it. Plant them up because I absolutely love them. But it didn't make my tried and true perennial list because I don't find it, because of all those different kind of slight issues. I mean, there are lots of other ones out there. Any perennial that we sell, you could say is tried and true because we believe that it grows in this area very well. Some of them need little requirements and little things here and there. I almost brought in clematis. I love the clematis vine because I didn't have any vines. It's pretty easy to grow, but it's a little bit of a fine vine. It's clay pot, Sherry, perfect for lavender. Great option. Helps with the humidity issues because it'll dry out. So really, really good option, Sherry. Good idea. But clematis is a great one. I love that vine. It needs to be underplanted with other plants. It needs to have some sort of like liriope or something that's going to kind of shade the root system. Mulch helps, but it's a lighter vine. It can be a little finicky, and it's really all about its feet. And just making sure that its feet stay cool through the summer, and so you got to underplant it. So whenever plants have some of those weird kind of little requirements, doesn't make them hard to grow, just makes them not extremely easy, low maintenance plants like some of these guys. Darlene said, have one my sister calls strawberry begonia. So yeah, there are begonias that are perennial. They have been very difficult to get recently. I used to love the perennial begonias. I haven't seen them for probably a couple years. So not sure if maybe those cold winters that we had kind of made us not super reliable with them. Like a great option or a great thought there is, the types of lantanas. Like Miss Huff Lantana. I absolutely love Miss Huff Lantana. I would not call that a tried and true because sometimes if we get a really cold winter, they don't tend to come back. Also, they take a long time to come back. had lots of people saying, I planted it last year, it hasn't come back. Most likely it hasn't come out of the ground yet. So it takes a lot of soil temperature to warm up in order for that plant to come back. So as much as I think it's a tried and true perennial, I don't know that I would 100% say that, because it gets big. It's a 3 to 4 foot high by wide plant. The begonia was borderline winter hardy. So there's a couple that are like that borderline that I just don't consider to be tried and true, like hostas. I can almost guarantee are going to come back year after year. If you don't have moles, voles, really voles, if you don't have voles, deer, or rabbit issues, then you can grow hostas and they're going to come back every year. Heucheras, hellebores, the perennial hibiscus, salvias, verbenas, all of those are tried and true and do very, very well in this area. So that's why they made my list today. So hope you all had a great day. Enjoy this. And we've got some warm weather today. Get out there and water your plants if you haven't been watering, because it's been dry in this area. But it looks like it's going to be a gorgeous weekend. We're going to cool back down. I hope you all have a great Memorial Day. Come and see us. If you're in our neck of the woods, come and check us out. We've got some great deals for our Memorial Day savings for our sales event. It'll be a great fun weekend. Hope to get to see you. And if not, I'll see you next week where we'll plant up some succulents. All right, everybody. Have a great day. Enjoyed it.